people were like puking. Like it was not great.
It was much worse than they ever dreamed.
You literally can't make this shit up.
Welcome to the You Can't Make This Shit Up podcast. This is the podcast where we laugh at the craziest experiences in our career, but more importantly, we unpack lessons learned and identify how we continue to move forward in our leadership journey. And so with us today, we've got a great guest that we can't wait to have Will on the show. And so Josh, you want to introduce Will?
Yeah, so I'd like to introduce Will Tenenbaum. Happy to have you on the show today. Thanks for coming in.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I think you flew in yesterday. Is that right?
That's right.
Yeah. So Will, give us a little background on your kind of origin story a little bit and how you came to sit with us today in this podcast.
Awesome. Yeah. So my background is in investing. I started my career in the hedge fund space. Was at a $6 billion hedge fund that invested globally. Lots of crazy stories about that as well. But I sat on, or through a partnership with our activist fund, we were on the board of Four City, a large family REIT, and half the family wanted to sort of move forward with a sale to Brookfield for $10 billion, and half the family didn't want to move forward, and it was a very contentious debate. And I thought to myself, it's very interesting that in the small room, in the boardroom, that such a big decision could be made. And the go-forward plan by management, aka the family that didn't want to move forward with the sale, was really not going to create much value. And so it was sort of a $10 billion upside. And I don't want to say zero, but it was sort of a $10 billion decision. And eventually we did get them to sell, and I turned to my dad at the time, who started the Entrepreneurial Center at Wharton back in 1980, and really taught me a lot about entrepreneurship and family business and governance. And I turned to him and I said, he then went into private equity for a while. So he had sat on 50, 60, 70 boards in his lifetime. And I turned to him at that point and I said, can you teach me everything you know about boards? Let's start a business together, because I couldn't believe that this room had so much power in terms of creating value. And so I started the business, Lodestone. Well, first I said to him, I was like, hey, can we start this business together? And he said, no, I'm kind of retired. I'd rather smoke a cigar by the pool, right? I mean, he had no interest in working with me at that time. And I was like, come on, you taught family business. Like, let's have our own family business. And
so give us a kind of, how old were you at this time?
So I was 23.
Okay.
So something like that, like young 20s. And, he had retired, was really more interested, again, smoking cigars by the pool and, reading and doing some consulting here and there, but he wasn't really into growing a business. And eventually I pushed and prodded enough, and he said yes. And so we started the business together, Lodestone Global, and our business focuses on building boards around the world, optimizing boards around the world, compensating, educating, and we have launching a fund to invest in the boards that we build. Launching a fund to invest in the companies we build boards for, because we find that if we can bring process, governance, procedures, money, and strategic alignment, we can create a lot of economic value and enterprise value. And so we've had a great track record over the last decade, and we've built thousands of boards, and so now we have some great stories from the boardroom, which I'm looking forward to share today.
I'm intrigued by the board. Obviously, as an entrepreneur, this is not something that I grew up having, right? I used resources and mentors, and I've some other organizations as advisors, but really building a board, and the decisions that those boards make and the impact that they can have. Like, what are maybe a couple of these big decisions that what this decision would look like with the board versus what it would look like without the board, and maybe some crazy story around that.
Yeah, I mean, so I can get into some crazy stories for sure, but at a high level, when people ask me about what is the ROI of boards, right? Because that's what a lot of the entrepreneurs say. Hey, I'm putting a lot of time and effort to build this thing. What am I going to get out of it? And we've done some research. There's some financial performance. Our average company that we work with has doubled, but the average company that has implemented a board is more like 50 to 60% revenue growth. Not over 90% of them see EBITDA growth. But it's really tricky to tease out causation versus correlation in the market that we're in. But I'll tell you, there's 50 different ways to leverage a board correctly, right? You can have them advise on M&A. You can have them work on your exec structure, compensation for your key executives, succession planning. I'd say the number 1 and 2 reasons that companies work with us is they're trying to grow rapidly. And so putting together, people with independent advice that have only interest in you growing your enterprise value, that have been there before, can answer your questions. It's like having, extra C-suite members for a quarter of the cost that allow you to have the most critical answers of your strategy as you're moving towards whatever objectives that you're trying to get to.
So one of the reasons for this podcast, like Tim said earlier, is really it's about, leadership, failure, and then triumph, and then lessons learned. Do you have a story maybe specifically around that, like leadership, maybe failure, and then triumph, and maybe how the board also kind of played a role in that?
Yeah. So there's a good story actually happened last year. I won't use company names or sizes or anything, but
why not? We don't want to go down that road.
We want to de-identify.
Yeah, let's keep it anonymous for now.
Yeah.
But it was a company, and it's been around 15 years and always profitable year after year, pretty stable business. I'm trying to think about how to explain it without giving away too much information. Stable business, and then they brought in a new CEO as they were trying to diversify their business from, the owner was taking a step back, and they brought in a new CEO to diversify their business away from this sort of stable core cash cow business that would throw off, a certain amount of EBITDA every year, to really grow a subscription business that would, initially cut into profitability, but eventually be, worth 20x revenue versus 1x revenue, right? Or at least 10x revenue. And so the concept there was, they were very good point marketers. They knew how to take a list and sell people on that list, but they didn't know how to really create, LTV and the concept of LTV versus, lifetime value of a customer versus the customer acquisition cost and that ratio, and how to really build a community within the subscription platform and how to really do a lot of these things. And so they brought in a CEO. At the time, they were forming the board. And it was sort of part and parcel at the same time. And the CEO was onboarded, and then the board was onboarded. And
so just want to clarify. So the board, did they pick the CEO, or
they did not?
Before?
They did not. The owner picked the CEO before the board was placed. And they had a CFO. It was an outsourced CFO that was there for 10 years. They had very talented CTO. Actually, their technology was one of the things that really brought a lot of the board members to play. But last year, all of a sudden, the performance went away. And we got a call 3 days before Christmas saying, hey, we've got a problem here. And apparently, the new CEO had been lying to the board for a number of months, a number of meetings. The CFO at best was, negligent, and at worst was complicit. We don't know the answer to that yet. And there were initiatives that the CEO had sort of come up with that eventually led to the inflation of the cost base, $5 to $10 million extra. They built a very new big facility. I won't say where. And they spent all this money in the hopes of this future growth that they were going to have. and the CEO couldn't come to terms with the fact that he wasn't getting the results that he was looking for. He was getting some revenue, but not a lot. And certainly on the margins, he wasn't getting.
Was this a delay in a product or
again, he was trying to launch this new, he was brought in to do this whole new big growth initiative with the subscription launch. And so, it was always amazing to me at board meetings, everything felt a little bit, we like choke point. What I meant by that was we weren't given access to a lot of the exec team the same way I would be on some other boards. Everything had to be filtered through the CEO. And it was always weird, and we always would comment on it. And at the time, and we can go through some lessons later, but at the time it was sort of like, well, why is this happening? This CEO came from a place where his only experience was fiduciary boards, not advisory boards. So he kind of saw the board as somewhat of a threat. And I think we thought he was trying to just control the messaging to his team. Reality is, obviously something else was happening. And so again, fast forward, we get the call 3 months before, or 3 days before Christmas, you can imagine, and we're in a cash crunch. We can't make payroll Jan 15. And this immensely profitable company with tons of millions of dollars on the bank, when all the board was brought in and always looking to the upside, all of a sudden now here's a problem. So we had to do a lot of quick things. We had a lot of meetings. We probably
had
had
emergency meeting at that time.
Emergency meetings like every day. Yeah. It wasn't just one. It was like an everyday, all hands on deck. The owner was back involved. Like he had been completely removed from the business. I mean, he was not involved with the day-to-day whatsoever. So he had to get reinformed with all the things that were going on. He would come to board meetings, but he wasn't, again, informed. Or as informed as an owner should be at this point. And so we had to do a lot of informing. We had to quickly remove the CEO. We removed the CFO. We had to raise emergency financing over a time period where no bank wants to talk to you to make Jan 15
emergency
payroll.
Emergency financing in 2 weeks.
In 2 weeks.
Okay.
Over the holidays.
Over New Year's. I mean, what a
right.
You literally can't make this shit up. I mean, that's the point of the podcast, right? Yeah. But I mean, literally, we're all sitting there together, and we're like, how are we going to get out of this situation, right? And so, fast forward to today, we were able to replace the CEO with 2 internal candidates. Again, I mentioned that they had a very good COO and CTO, and those both were elevated to presidents. And the owner, stepped back in as sort of more the visionary, and so they became a nice VI combo in the EOS terms. I know Tim, you're very familiar. We could talk about it more, but it's been working extremely well. The business has completely rebounded in a V-shaped recovery. The first half of the year was as good as we could have hoped for. And a lot of the initiatives that should have been in place with this new CEO, they continue to invest. So not only did they, get through the cash we were able to raise, I won't say the dollar figure, but raise the emergency financing necessary to commit capital. The board members themselves stepped up as pieces of it. I stepped up as a piece of it too. We all made sure that this was happening because this company is mission-based, and we really were very much aligned with the mission, and we knew that, we could fix things very quickly, and we did. And so, there's some additional challenges as in the wake of that. I mean, whenever you have LTM issues, your financing becomes in question, your lines become in question, and there's going to be a whole effort to try and, wipe the slate clean. It's going to take some time, but in terms of the performance of the business, it's completely rebounded, and they continue to invest through that. And so what I've been impressed on is the board's speed in terms of acting very quickly, the owner's decisiveness in terms of acting very quickly, the ability of these 2 members of the exec team that have been with them for a very long time to step up. I give a lot of credit to the 2 of them. They rationalized the cost base, but didn't lose the culture and the mission base that they were, which is extremely challenging, and we can get into that as well. But there's a lot of lessons learned from that tumultuous period that, I'm sure a lot of people would like to, hopefully nobody has to go through that where there are any owners where a CEO is, lying to them. But anyway.
So when you look at that issue, right, so it's kind of zooming out, you had a CEO that was really ahead of their skis, right? They got ahead of their skis. They put the organization in a bad position, and for whatever reason had lack of transparency to the board, right? And so whether that was self-preservation, whether there was something that was dishonest, whatever it was, there was a lack of transparency to the board, and you end up in an emergency situation, right? And so as you look at that situation, right, what were some of the warning signs that, looking back, hindsight being 2020, you now say, man, as I navigate a situation where someone's less than transparent or maybe, worse than that, what were some of the bells that now looking back should have been going off?
Yeah, there's probably three of them that I would point to. And one I kind of touched on slightly before, which was that the communication always had to funnel through this person. It's just a red flag. Usually the boards that I'm on, it's much more collaborative. There's direct mentorship, direct conversation, so that the conduit of information from board to management team isn't filtered through one person. So that was a big red flag, and we're not letting that happen again. And again, there was reason to believe why that should have existed, and we all sort of, what I teach proper board hygiene, and I would say that that's not something that we should let happen. Mm-hmm. And yet at the same time, in the moment, it was very much explainable. And so it's important, for a good lesson learned, regardless of what you think might be the truth or not, putting those processes and procedures in place that are best practices for a reason, so you don't get yourself stuck in these situations. The other thing I would say is some of the whistleblowers were being let go, and we didn't know they were whistleblowers until they were until post fact. But that was definitely a consideration. People on the finance team suddenly departing was very questionable. They didn't believe in the numbers that they had to be put forward. And I've had exit interviews with these people post fact, but maybe doing something pre fact would have been better. Usually that's a little bit too operational to get involved with the board, but maybe a summary of all of these things. If you had a step away owner, the owner's really relying on the board and the other management team to watch over the asset for them. Maybe you need to step in a little bit more. The old adage for boards is nose in, hands out. We definitely sniff some things, but you keep your hands away. In this point, you may want to have had, we probably should have stepped in a little bit more. And the other thing, which was a bit more, again, related to the communication angle, we have been working on what an ideal board book would look like. Get your KPIs, get your financial performance. And I don't think this would have happened if the books were appropriately given. So it's almost like you needed the CFO's help in some way to hide what was going on. And so that's why I said it was sort of a joint effort. And it's harder when you have two people working together because, then, yes, you have double communication, but it was sort of the financial part of the books was always left a little bit wanting, a little bit short, a little bit not too detail oriented. And, we would poke and prod in the meetings. But I would say this board was really focused on how do we get to this growth initiative. It wasn't really necessarily on the financial performance of the core business. And so a lot of the core of the meetings wasn't necessarily to go through prior financials. In fact, I teach that as a core tenet of what a good board should look like, is that you shouldn't spend time in the meeting covering prior financials. In this case, we should have, and we should have poked harder. And so, but yeah, that was another red flag, I would say, and lessons learned to say, how do we get the financials that there are independent sort of audit? It doesn't need to necessarily be through an audit committee on the board, although that's how fiduciary boards would do it. But in an advisory board context, how do you create that balance between accountability. You don't have the hiring and firing capabilities if you're an advisory board. But how do you balance that accountability with that, support and independent advice, where, at the end of the day, it's still management and the owner's call of what you want to do.
So some of our listeners might not be CEOs with boards, right? They might be mid-level managers. They're dealing with employees that could be potentially, wrong people for their organization, not core value aligned, could be hoarding knowledge, could be not sharing the appropriate information upstream for self-preservation, for gaining power within the organization, for a variety of thoughts. So some of the things I'm hearing you say, right, is making sure that there's transparency and that multiple people have a voice throughout the organization. So even if you're a mid-level manager or leader, you've got multiple people under you that you're hearing a variety of stories. So you're not allowing one person to drive the narrative throughout the organization. The right scorecard numbers, right? Being able to have access to the right numbers to be able to be the right leading and lagging indicators to give you an overall pulse, again, drives transparency through the organization. And so what other things, if you're speaking to that mid-level manager that could be having someone that, yeah, I can relate to this story. I had someone that, flat out lied to me for months, and then I dug into it and found out that.
Yeah, so we talked a lot about that actually at the, subsequent board meetings, because we didn't want to make that same mistake twice, right? And while I don't think two leadership head models work normally, this one worked for this company. It was sort of like an overcorrection, likely because of the fact, but they work so well together, and it was clearly defined roles.
Was there a timeline on that? Is it going to?
Yeah, so they have the owner wants to step back out again. So right. They were elevated to co-presidents, but one or an outside or somebody, because it's working so well, don't know we're gonna adhere to this timeline. But the initial thinking was, sort of a 6 month. Let's see if this works. But in the meantime, let's see if we can hire somebody external or somebody who has the, because they were CTO, COO, they don't necessarily have the same V that we were looking for in the CEO to lead us down this new path. But it has been working well. And so anyway, back to your question, Tim, though, is the alignment of incentives was also very key. I think you started this conversation. We don't know why he did what he did. Was he over his skis because he didn't have the talent? Was he over his skis because, he was trying to do something nefarious? There was an international angle and an international entity created, and there's a whole audit going on that piece. So
there's a whole nother can't make
the shit up piece to the story. But without getting into those great details, making sure that you're whether you're a mid-level manager, any leader, making sure that the people that you lead are incentivized in the right way to act in the right way is super important. Yeah. And we spend a lot of time at the board level thinking about this, but anybody really should be thinking about this. Do they feel safe to come to you and tell you the honest truth? We talk about it a lot in the board setting. Vulnerable boards are the most effective boards. Meaning, if you come as a management team and you're vulnerable and you say, hey, this is my problem, you're going to have a much better time. You're a much better successful board meeting, because then they can help. They're there to help. Absolutely. And I would say a lot of people, when they think about boards or in leadership in general, they think they need to have the answer to everything. And being self-aware and being vulnerable is oftentimes a great way to unlock that transparency that we were talking about. And this person was the opposite of vulnerable. Everything was massaged, twisted, moved in a certain way, messaged a certain way to, make sure that everybody thought the highest of him. In reality, because of that, we thought the lowest of him, right? Mm-hmm. So the irony isn't lost on me there. But, I think that any leader, you need to create that sense of, team camaraderie, that they feel safe to be vulnerable, and they have to be incentivized appropriately, because if you're only compensated based on massive outperformance and not compensated based on the trainings you do and, how you interact as a team member and what's your cultural alignment to the mission and vision of the company, then you can get these sort of outcomes where they're not sort of aligned.
I love that. That's great insight. And I think that's maybe another one of those we can write down as like one of those red flags, right? That if you have somebody that, it's always positive and there's no vulnerability, and that's why I love like EOS too. You bring issues to the table a lot of times, right? But if those things are lacking, I think that's a flag,
Definitely.
And I love the point about incentivizing behavior as well. I think that's important because the incentives can incentivize positive behavior or negative behavior, and you have to make sure that you focus on the right ones.
Absolutely. And I heard core value alignment, right?
Yeah.
What are the core values of the organization? What are the behaviors that we expect to see in our team every single day? And transparency, open to feedback, open to, having those blunt conversations become critical to the overall success of the team.
For sure. And, we spent a lot of time thinking through, like, I think in this case, it was very much, stock alignment or equity alignment or appreciation right alignment, which, it does create a tight connection to growing the enterprise value of the company. But it's always important when you're designing the comp schemes to make sure that, again, these things are taken into account. Are they acting the right way? Are they getting trained? If he was over his skis, it's possible that proper training could have helped solve the issue. If he came to the board and said, hey, I'm a little bit over my skis, we want to achieve this, we haven't really defined what the true value proposition of the product is. Can we spend a 2-day workshop just working through it? We would have done it. And in fact, after he was let go, that's exactly what we did.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. It's like that's what the board was there for, and
exactly.
He didn't take advantage of it.
Exactly.
Right?
He ran away. He thought that the board was something I had to present to, not learn from.
Well, so much of leadership, and we talk about this a lot in this podcast, is getting the most from your team, right? And in this particular scenario, the board is part of the team, right? It's not just your direct reports. It's all of the people around you. And, one of my favorite Tom Izzo quotes is the best players don't win games, the best teams do. And so part of being a great leader is to be able to first be self-aware of what are my strengths, what are my weaknesses. And if any of us think that we don't have any weaknesses, we're delusional, right? So everyone has weaknesses, but then how do I leverage the people around me, and leverage not in a negative connotation, but in a positive sense of how do I help get the most out of these people to help us achieve the overall organizational goals for the greater good of the organization.
100%. I would say in a lot of leadership research, the number one trait that you need to be a fantastic leader is self-awareness. And I think you touched on it. Why there? Because, in order to have a successful team, the leader needs to be self-aware of where they need help the most. Mm-hmm. And that willingness to help. I'll tell you, we say no to more clients than we say yes to, because oftentimes when people think about boards, they're not really ready to listen to board input. Mm-hmm. They don't want to hear it. And I say, that's a waste of my time and a waste of your time. If we put the board together and you're not going to listen to it. So in this case, it was interesting because the owner was very open, probably one of the most open to board input. But the CEO that was hired during this process, after we had kind of already accepted and started kind of doing the board work, was kind of the opposite. And so it was an interesting juggling factor. But that 100%, Tim, I agree.
It's interesting. Next week, actually, I'm speaking to a group of founder startup CEOs. And part of the topic is around how to most effectively leverage your board of directors. And the from the funder's perspective, that lack of transparency, that feeling that in those meetings they're being pitched to versus having an honest intellectual conversation of what's working, what's not working, and how do we drive the organization forward. So I think what you're saying here resonates across many organizations, but that's probably not the root. The root is, as leaders, we need to constantly be self-aware. We need to constantly be evaluating what we can do to drive ourselves further, drive the organization further. And if we don't have people beneath us or around us in the organization that are better at doing their jobs than we are at doing their jobs, then we're in trouble, right? So we've got to have the best team.
So if I can take this board concept and to your point earlier, if I'm a manager, a leader, if I'm an entrepreneur, a hired gun, I have, and I'm looking for, I do know that I have my weaknesses, and I'm looking for guidance, advice, either at a board level, or maybe it's mentors. Like what would be, I'm sitting there, I'm thinking, man, I really do need some help. What's some recommendations on how to go out and find the right mentors, if it is at, let's say a management leadership level, or maybe the right board? How do I figure that out? Because I'm sitting here thinking I need this.
Right. Yeah. I mean, well, obviously, we do that. So you could always contact us. But I would say it doesn't have to be a board in an official capacity. Not all organizations are ready for boards. There are a lot of professional organizations, YPO, EO, Maverick, Tiger 21, where you can create forums of, like-minded individuals who have gone through similar problems and, really experience share, which is really at the heart of a lot of these organizations. And it's a lot of what a board meeting is about too. I mean, at the end of the day, it's about seeing around the corners that you are about to go around and giving you advice about, the whole concept of Lodestone, which I like to talk about. The reason our business is called Lodestone is because it's the magnet the first magnet that the ancient Chinese found, that they picked up the stone and it always pointed north, and that's what becomes the stone in magnet. And that's what boards and what you need in your life. I feel like a lot of leaders are stuck doing the day-to-day, and they don't have time to work on their business because they're busy working in their business. And this is an opportunity to structure something. That's what the board at its core will do. But you can do this with, family issues. You can do this in a family council. You could do this with friends. You could do this in social settings. You can do this for your business. The application is the right thing, which is to say, let me remove myself from whatever the issue is du jour and really work on the business and not in. And it's actually interesting because our process is very different from all other recruiting firms. A lot of recruiting firms say, hey, I need a finance guy, I need a digital guy or a woman, I need a somebody in HR or something. And your executive recruiting firm will just find those people. And that's not the hard part. The hard part is really being introspective and saying, this is where I need the most help and why. This is where the objectives of my business are going. And here's what we can do, and here's where I need help. And that skills gap analysis is a step that's dropped many times from a business perspective. You don't need to pay board members to answer those skills. Sometimes it's consultants, sometimes it's mentors, sometimes it's other industry participants, sometimes it's industry associations, sometimes it's just data that you need to go buy, right? There's a lot of different ways to close that gap, but we focus on the board piece because that gap is always changing. And the good thing about the board is, unlike a consultant, is they've seen so many corners and you can always tap on them. It is like having an extension to your team that you mentioned before, Tim. And so, that those challenges and objectives will change rapidly, and ever so rapidly now, given where everything has been going. You just want good coaches on your side.
Yeah. Absolutely. I mean, I think the some of the organizations you mentioned, that we've been involved with have been, I think at different levels have been, I can speak from my experience, have been helpful. And without a board, I use that as almost like a board of advisors. And it was the first time that I was like, oh man, this exists. And I wish I'd have had this earlier. And there's a lot of different versions of that for the people out there to look at, EO and YPO and some of these other organizations, that are really helpful. And then I think depending on where you're at in your journey, then you can, bring that potentially in-house at a board level in all different ways.
But, yeah, it's almost like you're renting brain hours, I say, right?
Yeah.
Like, at a forum level, you're doing it, and maybe they're interested in your personal life and your, take a YPO forum, they're going to be helpful, but they don't know your business intimately. Mm-hmm. So they'll be able to give you advice, but it's sort of, helpful tangential advice. If you need direct advice on a specific project, maybe that's a consultant. If you need advice scaling your business to X, that might be a board member, right? Yeah. So like when we think about what our issues are, some are more operational, some are more strategic. So that's what we do when we spend a lot of time figuring out, okay, are you really ready for a board? People say, okay, am I big enough for a board? It doesn't have to do with size. You could be a $5 million company and have a real need for a board. You could be a $100 million company and have no need for a board.
Yeah.
It just comes into the fact of like, what are your strategic issues? What are your objectives? We have companies that range from 20 million at the low end to 10 billion at the high end, dealing with similar issues. Yeah, it doesn't have to necessarily be a size.
We talked about this a little bit at dinner last night, and I loved the comment you made. But how do you value the ROI on a board or for a board?
Yeah, I mean, we touched on it a little bit before. It's very tough. Like sometimes it's infinite, right? I mean, this you can't make this shit up story that I shared. If the board didn't step in, the company wouldn't be here anymore. So that's like divide by zero. It's infinite,
you're like
right?
Infinite
so
versus
I don't,
zero.
So like how do you value that ROI? I mean, in reality, like I said, there's some statistics around the ROI of boards. Not everybody's in that type of draconian scenario where, but even what got me interested in the board, a similar story, right? For a city, they could have been a very large sale to Brookfield or not. And so that's a pretty big delta at the board level to make that type of decision. In reality, again, most board meetings, you're going to get, M&A advice, one M&A decision, one key critical decision that improves your margins by a couple points, one key insight that's going to grow your business 5%. For some companies, it's going to be in the millions and millions and millions of dollars, compared to the cost of board members, which, the median for $100 million company is around 45 to 50 grand. We have the comp database. That's why I can talk about it. But, that number is a pretty crazy ROI when you think about millions versus 50 grand a year.
So I want to switch it up a little bit. If I remember right, are you into hockey?
Yes.
All right. Did you play hockey growing up?
I did.
Okay. We're in a hockey town here in Pittsburgh.
That's
so
right.
Let's hear like maybe a personal story about growing up and playing hockey. Maybe I can't make this shit up story with
your hockey background. We were in. I was playing with the Czech Junior Olympic hockey team in Mariánský Lázně, right outside of Prague, and I don't know. I was 16 maybe. And we would play, like absolutely, there was a lot of training. The reason they were doing it there, they have all these hot springs and stuff. So it's like, good
so
for
time out. Like, what are we doing in Prague? Yeah. Like how do we end up there?
Yeah. So again, I was playing internationally at a time, a lot of different, I played in Israel, I played in Canada. So I was able to play with a lot of different, international teams, and again we were training pretty hard during the week, and they would set up this 300 pucks at the end of the ice on one side, and you'd have to take the net and skate all the way down, pick up one puck, bring it in the net all the way back, 300 times, and people were like puking, like it was not great, right? Like everybody. We were like it doesn't look it now, but I fit shape at that time. And we felt great or whatever. Anyway, some of these crazy drills. That night, we're 16-year-old boys. We had a food fight in the cafeteria. Don't recommend. Don't do that. The coaches completely just let it happen. And we were like, why are they just letting? They didn't talk about it. We went to bed. No problem. Nothing happened. And all of a sudden, we hear like a knock at 1:30 or 2 o'clock in the morning. And we're like, no, practice isn't until 5. We've got another few. Like, what is this? That doesn't make any sense. And the coaches came in, woke us all up. They're like, guys, we're going. It's pitch black out. And they're like, bring your hockey bags. And we're like, no, coaches, we're practice at 5. We're not going to the ice right now. We're exhausted. Like, this was... And they made us take our bags and run up the local, like, hill with our hockey bags on. And it was like a, 5-mile hike with the hockey bags on, like, up as punishment for this food fight that we did the evening before. And, we all, again, just absolutely toasted. Then we have to go right into practice again. And it was a good lesson of like, hey, just because they don't react in the moment, doesn't mean they don't understand. And it's a good leadership lesson, actually, because, you don't always want to overreact to a particular scenario. You want to make sure, not that I condoned what they did, which was not ideal for everybody, but, as a leadership lesson, take your time, make sure you're making the right decision, make sure you're reacting the right way. Anyway, there's some pretty crazy stories, and it bonded us a lot.
Wait till 2 o'clock in the morning, and then you can.
It bonded us a lot. I mean, we ended up getting a silver medal there, and we were a much better team after all these things that shared. I don't want to say torture, but that shared negative experience together. That shared, experience that we had really brought us together as a team. So
it reminds me of the movie Miracle on Ice.
Yeah, kind of.
When
right?
they, lose to the Russian and they're doing the suicides back and forth across the ice again. They're turning the lights off again. So it seems like a pretty similar story, but ultimately it set the lesson home, right? That lesson stuck all these years later.
Sure.
You're never going to forget that lesson.
That's for sure.
That's a great story. Yeah.
That's awesome. And so what are some of the other lessons that you learned through athletics and leadership, and how have you applied that to your leadership journey?
Yeah, I think, it's interesting. I was I was very good as a young player, and I think I really required some humbling. Because, at least growing up where I did, you'd play very well, and you would have to be then, knocked down by your coaches in order to, learn that sort of humble nature. And I still remember one of the other games we were playing, and some pro hockey players that I was playing on, obviously they were 6 feet tall and at 14 and scoring, 90 goals a season and a 20, they'd be minimum 3 to 4 goals a game. And so playing with those type of people at a young age, you get to a situation where, you're going to score a lot of goals too, just by being around them, because they make you better. And so I think I had, in a championship game, like 9 goals or something like that in the first period and a half. And, I was definitely talking some trash for sure, inappropriately so. And again, I'm a young kid, and my coach had to make the comments of like in the locker room in the first period, like, we got to get some WD-40 to get this kid's head out the door, right? It's a big problem. And so, but I didn't care because we were winning, and it was a great time. And anyway, I took a silly penalty, and my coach benched me. And he benched me for the rest of the game, in a championship game. And, that always stuck with me as well, because it almost really doesn't matter how good you are. You have to be disciplined. You have to take the right approach. You have to be a good team member. And if you're again, not culturally aligned with how the coach and how the leader wanted us to perform. It didn't matter how much revenue you brought into the company or how many goals you scored, and I think that lesson is really appropriate for a lot of us to think through. It, just because they're a high performer, sometimes you feel like you've got the golden handcuffs on, or that you can't make the decision that you need to make because, you're beholden to the revenue or the profitability that person brings in. But, ultimately what you got to do is what's right for the long-term value of the business. And if they're not culturally aligned, or I have another good, can't make that shit up story about another board client, which we can get into, that touches on this point a lot. But I'll conclude with that. It's sort of make sure you make the right decision, and not the one that's a fast decision, not the one that is a economically motivated decision, not the one decision that, may seem right short term but isn't right long term. And I think that coach taught me that very, very early on.
Well, we see in sports and in business, right, when leaders have the same high standard across the organization, across the entire team, and treat people to that same standard, regardless if they're the high performer or not, it draws respect to that leader, right? Everyone understands, okay, it doesn't matter if I'm the top goal scorer of the game or I'm not, everyone's going to be held to this standard. And that's a powerful leadership lesson because it motivates people, and ultimately people respect that more than if people were held to different standards based off of their ability. And so that's a great lesson there.
And everyone's paying attention. Everyone,
absolutely,
seeing how everyone was reacting. Everyone's seeing the response, and that's important. And that's, I love that. And I love how we talk about it all the time. How many lessons we learn through sports and still learn through sports analogies. I use it all the time in my conversations with my teams. So I love that part of it. This has been awesome, man. I love the insight that we gained today.
Absolutely,
we got all kinds of, we kind of touched on all kinds of different topics and experiences. And man, it was awesome to have you here and to join us. And we're thankful for that. And hopefully, everyone at all of our listeners were able to get some insights and hear some really crazy stories from Will. And Tim, do you have any final thoughts?
Well, I would just love to ask Will that question. As we think of the parting shot here, hockey pun intended, right? What would you like our listeners to take from today's session? What would you like to share with them as your number one piece of advice?
Yeah, so I'm a board guy, so I'm gonna have to touch on that. And again, it doesn't need to be a formal board, but find your own personal board of advisors. Find the people that you trust, mentors, family members, friends, forums, official board members. Find that circle of confidence where you can be vulnerable, where you can ask the hard questions, and where you can really grow as a leader. Creating that safe space for your life is going to be infinitely better and generate infinite returns to you as a leader. And so that's the most important thing I think I would share for sure.
Absolutely. I firmly believe that every CEO needs two things to be successful. One, an operating system for their business, right?
What would that be?
I love the entrepreneurial operating system. Hit me up. We'll talk more, right? But then they also have to have that board of advisors. And whether it's peer group, my Vistage mates would kill me if we went the whole episode and didn't say Vistage. In addition to YPO or EO or other, other great Truth at Work, great Christian peer advisory. There's a lot of them out there.
Convene is another good one.
Convene, right? Yeah. And so find your tribe, right? Find those people because self-awareness, we've hit a lot on self-awareness today. And when you are able to have blunt conversations with people that care about you but don't have a vested interest in your business necessarily, or the vested interest is a board level, that their interest is the overall success of the board or the organization, not just a specific department.
Right.
That becomes critically important to be able to become self-aware, to be able to fill in your weaknesses that you have with talent that can help drive you forward. And so those combinations of those two things, I absolutely agree, are critical to everyone's success.
And I will say, I mean, it's not meant to promote anything, but if there are listeners that need guidance or need pointed in the right direction on any of these things, like definitely, reach out to us and we can try to help, because it is, I mean, it's changed the way my business operates completely, both on the two things that you pointed out, on the operational side and also the advisor side. So.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I know you said you had one quick parting story on your one of your other companies that you work with. You want to hit us with one more funny story as we leave?
Carrot was there. We got to.
Yeah, we got to untangle it. Yeah. So, I mean, it was just on this point. It was another company a top salesperson who was bringing in, 50% of the revenue. Yeah, not, a concentration risk you wouldn't want to have as an owner, but it's a lot of business. Mm-hmm. And it came through a couple of large relationships. And it turned out that this person was price fixing with their clients. And they were baked deals. And they were selling products that, again, I'm trying to keep everything as anonymous as possible. But they were, there was a shared investment in a house. There was, certain gifts given that were inappropriate. And again, without getting into too many of the details because it's ongoing still, the owner had to decide, okay, well, here's my cash register, here's my ATM. And ultimately my values are X. And what do I do? Right? Because I'm going to, and in this process, he was looking to sell the business. And so on top of it all, not only is it my cash register for me, myself as a person, but it's also, the value and the multiple I'm going to get at sale. And if I lose my top salesperson, what is that going to mean for my exit?
Can I just ride it out into the exit, or can I just,
can this be someone else's problem?
Yeah,
right. And it's very quick
situation.
and we talked about it yesterday. It's very quick to have your mind go to these places where,
get jaded really quickly.
You get jaded very quickly. And, we had a long conversation about it, and ultimately it came down to the fact, like, we don't want to have anybody have any relation, because the damage to the whole company's reputation, if we got into a lawsuit or something, would be a massive problem. And so we let the person go, which is a wild thing to say. And
right person.
Yep.
I'm sorry.
Right seat.
Wrong seat. Yeah, wrong person, right seat. Right.
Which we've talked about this. I don't know how many times, right? Like, how many, in your experience, you see this probably a lot. Like, this is one of a perfect example, especially on, let's say, like the sales side. It seems to be the case a lot where there's
100%. Wrong person, right seat is the absolute most dangerous person in any organization.
For sure.
They're not core value aligned, but they're great at their job. And when I work with my clients, I have clients that I've worked with for 2 years. And the first day I started working with them, they identified we had a wrong person, right seat. But it took them 2 years to get that person out of the organization. That's normal. Because these wrong people tend to hoard knowledge. They tend to put those walls up. It's that same story that we started with the CEO, hoarding knowledge, filtering conversations. Everything's going through them, and so they embed themselves into the organization. The only way to remove them is to basically surgically remove them. Right? They become the cancer within the organization. So, and so. To the listeners, as we close up here, right? If you have ever had employees that have lied to you, if you've ever had employees that have filtered information, hoarded information to ensure that the truth was not widely known. That's normal, unfortunately, and part of this journey, and you're not alone. And so hopefully through today's conversation, you were able to learn lessons through our lessons learned and Will's experiences of what he's gone through in his career. And so we appreciate you hanging with us as an audience. Will, we appreciate you being here today, sharing your experiences and your stories, and loved hearing about the hockey as well as your crazy employee stories, because we all have them. If we've led people for more than a minute, we have a story that we go home to our significant other and say, "Oh my God, I can't make this shit up."
Yeah.
And
You
so
really can.
that's why we're here. Thank you all for listening today. We are looking forward to having you continue to share this journey with us as we continue to release new episodes where we laugh at each other's challenges, we learn from them, and more importantly, we grow in our leadership journey. So I am Tim Tannert,
Josh Roberts,
and Will
Tenenbaum.
Thank you so much for
Thank you, guys.
being with us today, and thank you all for listening.